Today is Tuesday, August 29th, 2023. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearings. We have 6 cases on the agenda. The first 2 cases, RPC 14041-187 and RPC 0505-203A, have asked to be withdrawn. I assume, Mr. Chicas, there's no objection from the county?
No, ma'am.
Okay, with that said, I'll move to accept the withdrawal on the first one ending in 187. Do I have a second? Mr. Matzkin is second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. And the second one ending in 203A, I'll move to accept that withdrawal. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Lawson is a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, that is also unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Chicas.
Thank you.
Next up, we need, we've got Rob, and then do we have Mr. Harmon on?
Eileen.
I'm sorry, Ms. Borman. Can you turn your camera on? Is Ms. Borman on?
Let me reach out to her.
Oh, hey.
Okay, Eileen is will be here in just a moment.
I'm here. I just, I had you on, I was muted. You were muted.
Thank you.
Okay, can you turn your camera on?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we've got everyone. Next on the agenda is RPC 14013-046 at 1010 North Glebe Road. Ms. Borman, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Actually, ma'am, can you give me a second? I didn't expect to go just now. So if you could just give me a second before you start the timer so that I can get organized.
We can move to the next case if you're not ready.
Jordan, are you ready?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, do we have Ms. Shuttlesworth?
Yes, good morning.
Okay, moving to the 4th case on the agenda, RPC 1703903A at 1201 North Pierce Street. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property then.
Yes, thank you. So this is 1221 Gables Point Apartments. I'm going to share my screen here. So, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board, members of the government, good morning. To start, I assume everyone has a test page that shows through column G. The initial submittal only showed half the page, so I want to make sure everyone can see the full submittal. The issue on appeal is the market cap rate applied. Now, I want to start, last week there was some discussion about the effect of rising rents in future years and how that impacts the value of properties. I want to address that. While this is more reflective of a discounted cash flow analysis, which we are not allowed to use in Virginia assessments, we have provided on this particular case an example of rental rate growth. Here, we grew the 2022 rental income by 7.8%, which, as you can see on the DREA test column, the DREA was quick to adopt that assumption. Using this large increase in rent, we see that the final value is still $2.6 million below the initial assessment if we apply a cap rate that's reflective of the market as it stood on January 1st, 2023. The DREA's cap rate is the lowest cap rate used in any of the past 15 years and is simply not reflective of the market as of the date of value. For the cap rate, we can see here in the DREA response that the government claims a 10-year T-bill is not an appropriate measure of interest rates. Rather, the government asserts that shorter maturity bonds of up to 52 weeks are more appropriate. Let's look at a sampling of shorter term bonds that the government claims is more appropriate as indicative of interest rates and see how those have changed in 2022. Every one of the treasury bills with a 52-week or shorter maturity increased by 400 basis points or greater. over the course of 2022. So the DREA states that 236 basis point increase on the 10-year T-bill is not appropriate, that we should be looking at shorter maturity bills. These shorter maturity bills show support an even greater increase in the cap rate. Here you can see every short-term bond increased by about 4% or more over the course of 2022. The DREA cap rates did not change, picked up zero of this increase. Now, 2022 was unique in that the Federal Reserve raised interest rates 7 times and by 425 basis points. This is more than 3 times the average movement in interest rates over the past 15 years. 2022 is different from other years because of this. The last time interest rates increased anywhere nearly as rapidly as last year, the DREA increased base apartment cap rates by 125 basis points. We're only imputing an increase of 75 basis points. Now we can also look at the interest rate on other financial investments outside of government bonds to see what happened in 2022. The SOFR increased by 425 basis points. BBB US corporate bonds, often a proxy of cap rates, increased 310 basis points. 30-year fixed rate mortgages increased 331 basis points. Most, if not all, interest-bearing financial investments increased in 2022. Now, these interest rates increased steadily throughout the year from when the Fed began raising rates in March. This was not a one-day phenomenon. Rather, it was spread across 10 of the 12 months of the year, with more known to be coming in 2023. This does impact the market. This was known as of the date of value. It was known as of mid-year 2022. So interest rates do affect cap rates, and interest rates did rise across the board throughout 2022. And even with an ambitious projection of rent growth of nearly 8%, if we apply the appropriate cap rate, we get a lower value than the assessment. The taxpayer, again, we've imputed 75 basis points as an appropriate increase to the cap rate. Now I'd like to direct your attention to page 6 of the board submission. Here you see the second set of data shows sales data through December 31st of 2023. What you will not see on this list that the DREA has provided of 2023 sales is the Avalon on Columbia Pike, which sold on July 24th of 2023. This property sold for $105 million. The 2023 assessment for this property is right at $118 million for an assessment to sale ratio of 112%. This property was built in 2009, just like the subject property, and was 95% occupied at the time of sale, just as the DREA mentions this property was on June 27th of 2023. We can back into a sale cap rate from this sale count. We can use the 2023 assessment of $118 million and back into the NOI the DREA applied to this property by applying the guideline cap rates to each parcel. Then we back out the retail portion of the property to get to the multifamily NOI. Applying this NOI to the sale price, we get to a cap rate of 6.66%. The assessment for the multifamily portion of the Jasper, this comp sale, is 5.5%, a difference of 116 basis points. So we know the assessment missed the cap rate on the sale count by 116 basis points. Clearly, the guideline cap rates do not reflect market cap rates as of the date of value. For the subject property, we have only imputed a 75 basis point increase. I also spoke with a multifamily owner in the county last week who is reviewing purchase opportunities in the county. He told me that the cap rate needs to be a 6.3 to 6.85% for them to be interested in a property due to the cost of capital. He said these rates are for value add opportunities, meaning the cap rates would be higher for newer stabilized properties. Again, here the DREA is only at a 5.5% cap rate, fully 135 basis points below the upper end of this market participants analysis. Now we can also look, what about the cost of capital? We can analyze the effect of the increases in the cost of capital by looking at only a 200 basis point increase in loan costs. We know the SOFR increased by 425 basis points. Let's just assume a conservative estimate of only 200 basis points. You can see here that as of January 1, 2022, an estimate of the cost of capital of 3.52% with a 70% loan to value results in a weighted average cost of capital of 2.46%. 1 year later, January 1, 2023, knowing the cost of capital increased by at least 200 basis points and that banks now require a greater share of equity, you can see the cost of capital increased by at least 106 basis points year over year. To wrap up, I want to address the second comment on the DREA test page. I was surprised when I saw this comment. You can see on the screen the email request the DREA sent for this property's rent roll. You can see here Ms. Shuttlesworth states the rent matrix information that the DREA requests on their I&E forms is not sufficient for assessment purposes, according to Ms. Shuttlesworth. I want to point out that the owner of this property did provide what was requested on the I&E and provided it for each of the past 3 years. All the I&E request is a rent matrix, as you can see on page 88 of the board pack. This information is provided on page 92 of the board pack for 2022, page 103 for 2021, and page 111 for 2020. Providing this information to the DREA was a courtesy of the owner to the government, as this information is not required to be provided by law. I communicated this to Ms. Shuttlesworth in response to her request. I also told her that owners are typically hesitant to share this information due to privacy and confidentiality concerns. We have seen multiple instances this year where the government has shared confidential information publicly and with non-owners. This was all communicated to Ms. Shuttlesworth, who chose not to reply. None of this was brought up in the DREA hearing we had for this property either. The owner provided 3 years worth of rent matrices as requested by the DREA. This is above and beyond what is required by statute. Additionally, the pro forma even grows the rental income by nearly 8% over what the property reported in 2022. So the owner is in compliance with the law, provided more information than required, provided aggressive rent growth assumptions, and yet the DREA was not satisfied. To summarize, the cap rate is not reflective of the market caps based on any of the metrics that you look at.
Time is up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Shuttlesworth for the county, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So the subject property is a mid-rise multifamily building with 132 units, and it was built in 2009. The amenities include fitness center, business center, community lounge, cyber lounge, and package notification. An interior and exterior inspection was conducted on June 27th this year. An informal hearing was held on June 23rd, also this year. The issue is that the appellant is contesting the cap rate. We have performed the analysis of the I&E surveys provided to us from 2019 through 2022, and we have concluded. The 2020 and 2020 I&E surveys show decline in rental, parking, and other income. The NOI reported for 2021 showed a 26% decline as compared to the 2020 NOI. Things started to look a little bit better for the subject in 2022 as the rental income experienced an 8.5% growth and the vacancy and concession declined from 6.45% to 5.66%. We have not received the actual 2022 rent roll, so we could not determine the physical vacancy as of January 1, 2023. Again, the appellant's representative stopped providing these just recently to our department due to privacy and confidentiality concerns. They did provide the summary rent roll with their own average monthly rent calculations, which you can see, I believe it is on page 12 in the BOE packet. When you compare the average monthly rents provided by the appellants to the rents we used in our worksheet, which you can also see on your page 4, you will see the numbers are almost identical. The 2022 I&E had to be reconstructed to exclude $259,744 of capital expenses, which was for the roof replacement. Our projected rental income and GPI very closely mimic the figures projected by the appellant. And we also applied OPEX at, you can see, well, I cannot say it aloud, but you can see the OPEX per unit we have applied in our test column F is actually higher than the OPEX per unit appellant used in his pro forma. And with such conservative approach, the fair market value estimates stated in our test column F is still above the subject 2023 assessment. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from any board members? Mr. Matskin?
Thank you. Since this really is, as excuse me, DRE has pointed out, really only a cap rate issue, because numbers, income, expenses are all very, very, very close. I think it's worthwhile for the department to again review why, in the face of the appellant's expansive exhibition of increasing interest rates and the proposed effect on capitalization rates and therefore sales prices, why the department didn't change capitalization rates from last year to this.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I believe last week, the 10-year, and by the way, I just wanted to make a clarification. We never implied that we should use 52-week T-bill as a measure. That was not correct statement.
It's in the comments.
Yes, I'm glad everybody can see the comments. Thank you. So the 10-year Treasury note is a benchmark for the investors. Investors use it to decide whether or not it's worth for them to take risky investment, more risky investment. We are assessors. We use different metrics. We've never used 10-year Treasury note as a metric. We analyze INEs provided to us, hundreds of INEs, and we follow the trends. And if we see that there is a trend in NOI surveys that would dictate the changes need to be made, we make those changes. They're not always made to the cap rate. We might address the issues by adjusting rental market rates. We can address it by adjusting the vacancies. We can adjust it by modifying the OPEX ratios that we apply. We don't use 10-year Treasury note as a measure. No other surrounding county does that. And what I meant is there's no such thing as 10-year T-bill. What I meant is that T-bills are 52-week investment vehicles. They're just short maturity. I never mentioned, I never stated that it should be used as a measure. Okay. So this is my response to the cap rate. And again, I think Mr. Harmon mentioned Avalon property, the sale that occurred in July. We actually had a hearing for that property last week. That sale occurred in 2023, and it will be used in 2024 analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.
And can I just note that there were 13 sales that were for 2022 that were included in our cap rate analysis. In addition to using those 13 sales that are in part of the 2023 guidelines, we also reviewed all of the income and expense questionnaires that were submitted by the department. So there is a thorough analysis that is completed every year to determine that year's cap rates. Right now, we appreciate the information for this year's sales, which will be used for next year. Thank you.
And if I may, those 2022 sales were primarily first quarter sales, so they did not pick up the 9 months of interest rate increases.
Okay, but that's what was available. Okay, other questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, real quick question for you, Jordan. The developer you spoke to, was he talking about built projects or to be built projects?
Existing projects that he was going to go in and invest some CapEx and then try to bring up rents via that method. And that's why he was able to project a cap rate, purchase cap rate below the cost of capital, was because of those assumptions of investing and bringing NOI up.
Is he an all cash purchaser?
No.
Okay, any final questions? No, Ms. Shuttlesworth, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Sure. So again, our tested GPI and EGI are very similar to the figures reported by the appellants in their pro forma. Our tested NOI is below the NOI they actually reported on their pro forma. And we recommend confirming the subject's 2023 assessment at $40,713,500. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So apartments investing, at the heart of it, it's a financial investment. You're buying an income stream. So with that, you have to take into account the cost of capital and looking at, and interest rates play into that. Looking at every measure of interest rates, we chose the 10-year T-bill as a conservative estimate. It changed the least of most interest rates. I showed that shorter term maturities changed over 4%. The SOFR changed over 4%. The cap rate changed 0%. The last time this happened in 2009, 2010, the county did increase cap rates by 125 basis points. We're only requesting 75 basis points this time around when the interest rate effect was even greater than the last time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All righty, it's just among the board members. Where's everybody on this? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, why don't I go ahead and start and share a few thoughts. I think in the office market, it's been clearly demonstrated there has been a revolution in the way things are happening, and cap rate adjustments are appropriate. On the residential, it's not as clear to me, and you have a couple things going on in the industry, and one of them is that people like, I don't know, John Shushan, he has apartment buildings and he has existing loans, and eventually those loans come due. And when they come due, then the interest rates got to go up. And so the project's going to have to carry that increased interest rate. There's been some articles written about it, that this used to be, quote, the safe harbor for investing in real estate. Maybe it isn't anymore. I think the industry is still shaking out on how projects like this are going to continue to be held and financed. I did a little bit of a calculation, and assuming that there's no loan on the property, you're still looking at a return on value of between 5.8 to 6.4%, depending upon where the actual value is when you look at the cap rates. And so I think that this probably will have an impact. What I'm seeing right now is that the buyers that are out there are picking properties that they can acquire at under what they think their true value is. They're looking at distressed properties, things of that nature. And so we do have comps out there. We have comps this year out there. How much they're a cherry picked by a all cash buyer or somebody who has plenty of financing ability, I don't know yet. That's something that we're going to have to see how it plays out in the future. I myself, speaking just for myself, and I'm very curious what others are going to say, I myself am not yet convinced that it's time to adjust cap rates for residential. And I say that because you have increasing rents, you have values in Arlington that typically hold. I remember developers used to say, if you're going to make a mistake, make it inside the Beltway. And you are going to have future appreciation. And so I don't think you can say, okay, well, interest rate is this on a T-bill, and therefore cap rate is this. I don't think the two necessarily are as tied together. Office, totally different story. You have terrible problems with office. So with that, I'll be quiet.
Okay. All right, other folks? Nothing different?
No one else has? Come on, folks, share your thoughts.
Mr.
Can you see
Matthews,
me, Mary?
I can. I'm Go ahead, please.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I mean, sometimes it gets, my question only is, I don't see Mark or Jose anywhere. Are they here?
They're
with
here.
us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
I liked Barnes' comments. So that's all I need to say.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything different? No? All right. Would somebody like to make a motion then?
I'll make a motion to confirm the county assessment of
Okay.
$2,239,200. Oh, I'm sorry. Read the wrong number. The 40,713,500.
I'll second.
Okay. Motion is second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I will not vote on this one.
Okay. So that is 4-0, and the county's confirmed at 40,713,500. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and keep with Ms. Shuttlesworth since we started early. So let's move to the fifth item on the agenda, which is RPC 1602-102A at 1001 Wilson Boulevard. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes on that, please.
Yes, thank you. So this is the London and Normandy House apartments in Roslyn. The two buildings have a combined 196 units and were built in 1965. The buildings feature original floors and original windows. Additionally, the roof dates to 1995 and will need to be replaced in the near future. To account for this, the DREA did increase the effective age of the building, which we appreciate. The DREA recommended value is a $5 million increase over the 2022 assessment. The issues on appeal are the vacancy and collection rate and the cap rate. Starting with the test page, the DREA did not provide a complete page until this morning, so we only have columns A through D, but I can tell you from those columns A through C purport to show the operating history of the property, but it's not accurate. It appears the columns were all shifted. The 2021 NOI should be, as reported on the INE, $3,498,000, not $4,531,000. 2021 NOI should be $2,916,546, not $3,498,000. And while I cannot see what they've entered for the 2022 column, the NOI reported on the INE was $3,536,388. So knowing this, the prior 3 years average NOI was $3,317,000. The assessed NOI is $3,669,000. This discrepancy is due to the assessment not considering the actual income loss due to vacancy and collection loss, rent loss, and concessions. This property has operated well above 6% vacancy and collection loss imputed by the assessment for each of the past 3 years. Here again, the columns on the page we were provided are incorrect as to vacancy and collection loss. For 2020, vacancy and collection loss was 9.2%. For 2021, it was 16%. Last year, 2022, it was 8.3%. This is a 3-year average of over 11% vacancy and collection loss. Clearly, the 6% imputed by the assessment is not capturing the actual state of this property. A higher vacancy and collection loss rate for this property makes sense. This property, as I stated at the beginning, was built in 1965 and still has the original floors and windows. The amenities are below what typical tenants expect. The pool is walled off and lacks sunlight. The gym is on the roof of the building. You have to take an elevator to the top floor, then go up a stairwell to get to the small gym on the roof. Finally, these properties are located at the edge of Roslyn, where there are large vacancies in the neighboring buildings, and it's really a lackluster vibe in this area. You can see in the assessor comments that the vacancy rate on one day in June when we visited the property was used to justify the 6% vacancy and collection loss rate. This misses the impact of the loss at this property for several reasons. First, this states one day out of 365. This gives us a view of the property on only that day and does not take into account the rest of the year. It doesn't take into account the day before the visit or the day after or any of the other days of the year. By doing this, the assessor ignores the full year vacancy data that they were given on the I&E. On the 2022 I&E, it asks what was the average vacancy over 2022. You can see on page 75 of the board pack that the property reported an average of just vacancy loss of 6%. This doesn't include rent loss, collection loss, concessions. The average vacancy for 2021 was nearly 12%, as shown on page 80 of the board pack. Yet the assessor again relies on the vacancy on one day in June of 2023 to support the vacancy and collection loss rate. Relying on the vacancy rate on one day in June also ignores, again, the rent loss and concessions that this property has reported historically. We request the actual 2022 vacancy and collection rate of 8.3%, which is the lowest of any of the past 3 years reported, to be applied to the assessment. Next to the cap rate. The cap rate was adjusted based on effective age, but remains unchanged due to any of the financial turmoil experienced in the market over the course of 2022. The tax-loaded cap rate is only 5.55%. The previous property we heard was assessed at a cap rate of 5.5%. That building was built in 2009. This one dates to 1965. That building had a stabilized vacancy and collection rate near the DREA imputed rate. This property has averaged 11% plus vacancy and collection loss over the past 3 years. This property would fit the bill of more of a value add type project that fits what I was speaking to that local investor I mentioned in the last case would look at. That investor again mentioned they need a cap rate of 6.3 to 6.85% to be interested in a purchase. Again, the cap rate on this property is only at 5.55%. Now, as to the question of cash buyers versus type buyers taking out a loan, a couple of points. First, I'd ask, how has the DREA adjusted sale cap rates for cash buyers in their model? They mentioned that they have 2022 sales from the beginning of the year. How have they adjusted those for cash buyers versus buyers who took out a loan? Second, if you are a cash buyer, you're increasing your risk. You're increasing the amount of money that you have at risk with the property. Necessarily, you also increase your required return. In conclusion, considering the cost of capital alone that took place over the course of 2022, that shows an increase of 106 basis points, assuming that that's conservatively assuming an increase of only 200 basis points in the cost of capital and not the 425 basis points that the SOFR actually did increase. This is in line with responses to a survey of local investors, which showed multifamily cap rates increased by 93 basis points from year-end 2021 to year-end 2022. As such, we respectfully request the cap rate be increased by a conservative 75 basis points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Shuttlesworth for the county, please.
Yes, so the subject property is located 3 blocks east of Roslyn Metro Stop. It is a high-rise style built in 1965 building, and it's located on 2 separate parcels, 2 separate buildings, Normandy House and London House. And the combined property amenities include pool, gym, a rooftop terrace for grilling and gathering, and garage parking spaces. The property is also part of the development plan that was already approved by the board. An interior exterior inspection was conducted on June 28, 2023. An informal hearing was conducted on June 21st this year. The issue is that the appellants are contesting the vacancies and collections and the cap rate. So when you look at our test column F, you can see we're very conservative. We actually mimicked the potential income from apartment. We actually mimic whatever the appellant had on his pro forma. We also have mimicked closely the other streams of income, which is parking and other income. And our projected GPI is just slightly above the projected GPI they have in the column G. Now, based on the visual inspections, we did adjust the effective age, which resulted in the cap rate change from 5.45 to 5.55%. And we also applied the OPEX per unit, which is higher than they actually projected on the pro forma. Now, we were not able to verify the actual physical vacancy as of January 1, because again, we were not provided the actual rent rolls for the prior year. And based on the conversation with the on-site property manager I had during the inspection, I was only able to verify that the occupancy level as of June 2023 was 98%. The NOI reported very modest increase. The 2022 INE reported very modest increase, as you can see. And based on, yeah, I already said that. So our proposed NOI in column F shows only 3.75 increase, and it factors the increased occupancy level to 98%. And based on the summary rent roll provided by the appellant, again, we could not actually establish the physical vacancy as of January 1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? I'll just ask Ms. Shuttlesworth, can you just address the point that the appellant brought up about that the NOI on the prior years is incorrect?
The 2021, yeah, I'm looking at it right now. 6-1. Yes, Mr. Harmon was correct. They were shifted. The columns were shifted. So yeah, that is a mistake on my part.
Okay, so what are the final NOIs?
So for 2021 NOI, is 2.916 million, 546,000.
Okay.
For 2020, it's 3.498001.
Okay.
And for 2019, it's 4.531031.
Okay.
Yeah, I apologize.
All right, thank you. Other questions? No? Okay, any final comments, Ms. Shuttlesworth?
No, not really. And again, I just wanted to add that we did perform the inspection on site. We did address the effective age. The property is dated. It has old roof that will need replacement soon. Original windows, original floors, only few kitchens have updated cabinets, and the units are updated on as needed basis. We addressed that, and we asked the board to confirm our revised assessment of $66,108,600. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. So page 75 of the board pack provides the 2022 INE. There you can see they have a line that asks what was physical vacancy on January 1, 2023. The owner reported 8.1%. The DRE EA has that information. Next, this property is riskier than other properties. You can see the fluctuations in NOI. That's because of the age of this property. It's because of the location. It's not well situated. It's an old property, so it is riskier than other properties. Now, the DREA does include June 28, 2023 information to support their assessment. It's only fair for the appellant to include 2023 information as well. This property, Jasper Columbia Pike, sold at a cap rate of 6.66%. That's 116 basis points above the DREA guideline rate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bo. All right, it's just among the board members. I mean, I'll start on this. I mean, initially when I looked at this, I thought, okay, 4.3, 4.5, 3.4, 3.5. We're kind of in the ballpark. It's trying to come back, but I think the fact that we've got the incorrect information there and the 4.3 drops off and we go to 2.9, 3.4, 4.5, and 3.1, I think there's more of a gap and a spread that keeps it, you know, that I'm uncomfortable with. So what I did was just took column E, the operating numbers coming from the appellant, which, you know, and to quote Ms. Shuttlesworth, they're somewhat mirrored. I mean, it's close, but it's not quite there. But if you take that number and cap it out, it comes out to 64,297, 950, which is still a $3.1 million increase. It's, you know, over 5% increase from last year. I think that's more realistic than where it is right now. It's like a 5.1% increase, but interested in what other folks have to say. Mr. Matskin?
Thank you. I didn't see, this is a dated property. It's in process of being down the line of being redeveloped. Certainly the commercial property between the two residential properties is finally, after probably 12 years of discussion, about to be redeveloped. So it's upsetting here. And it's stabilized, it seems, but 8% increase to me is more than stabilized. So what I did was even simpler, but came up with close to the same conclusion. I just took the test, column F, but applied what the appellant says was the true nature of the vacancy and concessions, 8.3%, and came up with a figure of 63,439,000 plus. So, and again, it's inductive reasoning. I thought an 8% increase just seemed unwarranted to me in this situation, given its vicissitudes.
Agreed. Other folks? Mr. Miranda?
Yeah, not having the whole, all the columns in the package, you know, I was trying to figure out exactly what was submitted and looking at all the past income and expenses statements from the appellants. I pretty much came up with the, you know, and I agree with Mr. Harmon that, you know, the average NOI was about 3.3 for all these past years. And what I did is I went further than I would normally do, but I took the original assessment and I took the vacancy at 8% and the expenses at the same 39.5. So my final value is much lower than what you came up with. A little bit above from last year, but I came up with 61,714,300.
Okay, so, and what percentage is that? Do you know? Jose, did you do that?
What percentage of what? I'm sorry.
Increase?
Oh, I didn't do that. I mean,
Okay.
last year it was very little. It's very small.
Yeah.
600,000 miles.
Okay.
Again, what was the key number you changed, Jose?
The vacancy and concessions at 8%. That's the main one. The expenses were the same, 39.5.
Well, then maybe my math is wrong. So I did what you did, 8.3%. So I should have gotten a number lower than yours, and I didn't. I got one higher. So let me check my math.
Yeah, I use 8%, and the expenses. I mean, the vacancy and concessions amount is 517,152. So the EGI is 5. Let me see. You may be right. You may be right. I'm sorry. Let me double check. Go ahead if you have any other comments. So I'm going to double check on that amount.
Okay, Mr. Lawson? Turn your microphone on, please.
Oops, sorry about that. I didn't realize I turned it off. I may be in the minority again. I'm good with the county assessed value, and I think that probably the owner is treading water until circumstances line up and they raise this and rebuild. So I'm okay. Looks like I'll get outvoted.
Okay, Mr. Yates, anything? Okay, did we check the math? Mr. Matthew,
I checked mine and it's at 8.3% and 63, 439, 900 is what I get again a second time. And I'll address Barnes' comment. I agree completely. They're treading water and they're going to put in as little as possible. And it's to me another reason why it shouldn't go up 8%
Right.
assessment from last year.
all right, Mr. Penaranda, where are you on the math?
Yeah, I'm sorry, 8%, I come up with 65,873,700.
Okay, well, that's even higher. All right, you're gonna make me get into this.
Yeah.
What's
You
your
have to
figure,
say
Jose?
The final
65.
value is 65,873,700.
All right, I would be good with that.
Yeah, that Jose, you and I are only 0.3% difference.
Right, did you change the cap rate though?
I didn't change the cap rate, no.
5.555.
Oh, that's why, because the cap rate should be changed.
Oh, I'm sorry, to what?
5.55 if he's using 5.45.
No, 5.5. I have what is in column F, which Mrs. Shuttlesworth, noted was an increase from their original column D assessment work.
Talking, I got 63, 910, 198.
Yeah,
What'd you
Yeah.
get, Jose?
What, at 865, 274, 800, so somewhere where,
63 is what I,
All right, you're taking column D, correct? And you're changing the vacancy to 8%.
right.
Okay, so let's just do here, 6.4. Okay, so an EGI of 5947248.
59, I come up with 5932,422.
That's not 8%.
Let me see, 64, 400. Well, the amount for vacancy in collections would be 517,152. Is that what you come up with?
And I just did 92%, which is a shortcut. So I've got a EGI of 5947248.
Well, it's 5947248 by taking the 8%.
And then you're taking the 2400232 for expenses?
No, I'm taking 39% from the new amount.
And why are you changing operating expenses, the percentage?
I'm not changing operating expense. Well, I'm just taking the same percentage, 39.5.
Oh, you said 39, it's 39.5. Right. Yeah, okay, lower EGI, then of course OpEx would be lower, and that's describes why his NOI is assessed, his NOI and assessment is higher. That makes sense.
All right, so what number is everybody comfortable with?
What number are we discussing?
Well, Jose's changed from 61 million. Read your number again, Mr. Penaranda.
The final value on this would be 65,419,700.
I'm good with that.
All right, Mr. Matskin.
Sure, I join the consensus. It's got to be lower than what the test shows, I
Okay.
believe.
Mr. Yates.
Yes, and
Okay.
then Ken, I think you left out the expense change.
No, I did leave it out. You're right.
Yeah.
But we're working off the test, not off the
Okay,
original.
okay.
That's
Yeah,
where
I
the
can-
discrepancy is.
Okay. All right, Mr. Penaranda, do you want to make a motion then?
Sure, I'll move that we reduce the assessment to 65,419,700. And that's by increasing the vacancy and collections to 8%
Off the original
of the original assessment.
and changing the cap rate.
And changing the cap rate to, yes, 555.
Okay. Do I have a second on that? Mr. Matskin. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. It's reduced to 65,419,700 based on the original assessment, increasing the vacancy to 8% and changing the cap rate to 5.55%.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay, moving back on the agenda to item 3. Do we have Mr. Peralta?
Yes,
There we
thank you.
Okay, RPC 1401346 at 1010 North Glebe. Ms. Borman, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
You bet. Thank you. This property was built in 1986. We did request a department hearing and that request was refused. Like almost every case the board has heard, the county has used information through July of 2023. And the taxpayer respectfully requests that it also be allowed to include information through July 2023. Interesting facts. The income has declined every year since 2019, or a total of 46% from 2019 to 2022. The assessment is down only 11% during that same time period. The property was 50% vacant, about 50% vacant on year 1. And perhaps the most interesting information is that the property was surrendered to the lender, Affinius, using a tender option. And you can see this on page 8, that Affinius is now the true owner. Previously, it was Meridian. Also on page 8, you can see that the loan balance was about $31 million. So the assessment is significantly greater than the loan balance. The owner opted to give this property back, and using a tender option, it did so. Issues on appeal are the rent on occupied space. Taxpayer uses 3939. Rent on vacant space, 3501. The vacancy rate, 30%. Operating expenses, 10.87%. Cap rate increased by 2% and lease up 2 years. The department's cap rate is disassociated with market reality. The fourth quarter sales demonstrate that the guidelines are wrong. The financial markets don't support the guidelines. The county ignored interest rates when determining the guidelines, and not even the outdated CORPAX report supports the guidelines. Fourth quarter market sales contained in the guidelines indicate that at 1776 Wilson, that property was originally assessed at 15% more than it sold for. You would need to increase the county's cap rate by 100 basis points. 2445 Army Navy sold for $6 million. 140% is the sale assessment ratio. You would need to increase the cap rate, the DREA cap rate, by 294 basis points. So there's a 100 basis point increase, a 294 basis point increase, or an average of 197 basis points that you would need to increase DREA's cap rate, or 1.97%. DREA has historically tracked somewhat the 10-year T-bill. Over the last 15 years, the average delta between the T-bill and the county's lowest cap rate is 3.45%. This year it was only 1.51%. You would need to increase the cap rate by 194 basis points to get to the average over the last 15 years. CORPAX's study, completed August 2022, Average occupancy, 95% for the buildings in Arlington. According to the guidelines on page 27, the average occupancy rate for buildings in Arlington was 77%, so a full 18% greater. The weighted average lease term on the properties in Mr. Korpax's study was 7 years. This property has a weighted average lease term of only 2.1 years. Mr. Korpax states cap rates bottomed out in 2019 and have increased from 19 to 22. Cap rates have been unchanged in the county from 2019 to 2022. Mr. Korpax also states that rollover risk and high vacancy increases the cap rate, and the county has made no adjustment to any of its properties for rollover risk or high vacancy. On page 60, Mr. Korpax states real property cap rates, pricing, and values are driven by numerous factors, including location, occupancy, tenant credit, space market characteristics, competition, transaction volume, financing, investment risk, and expected income. So here you have a property with 2.1 years left of weighted average lease term. You have financing that has gone up dramatically. You have transaction volume that is near zero. And as a result, the cap rate should be increased. We have SOFR going up 425 basis points. Triple B, U.S. corporate bonds 310, that tends to be the indice that mirrors most office properties. Fixed year mortgage rates up 331, a 10-year T-bill up 236, DREA up 0. Impact on markets of financing. So on 1/1/22, you can have a triple B bond at 2.6% using 70% debt to equity ratio. The weighted average is 1.82% in terms of the cost of the rate of return. 1/1/23, you have a 5.8% triple B rating, 70%, 4.06 would be the weighted average for that portion of the return. That's 224 basis points. To summarize on the cap rate, the historic difference between the county's rate and the 10-year T-bill is 3.45. You need to add 194 basis points to get there. County sales indicate you should go up 1.97%. The taxpayer went up 2%. Cost of financing went up 2.24%. 10-year T-bill, 2.36%. Triple B corporate bonds, 3.1%. We went with 2% because we felt that looking at the county's information, 2% was supported by the county's own information, despite the fact that a higher increase in cap rates for a well-stabilized property is reasonable. Rent. On page 7, DREA states that the rent is $43. I invite you to look at page 7 and you'll see that the county rounded up. The actual face rent was $42.65 if you take the occupied office and the total rent per office. Reducing that by 10%, you get to $38.39. Taxpayer uses $38.39. In the test, DREA uses $40. Vacant office space. DREA uses $39. The asking rent on page 8 of the appeal in the county's part, $39.75. The asking rent, like it's 10%, is $35.77. There were 4 leases signed in 2021. They appear on page 55 to 61 of the package. Base rental rate of $38.85. After concessions, $35.01. $35.01 is what the taxpayer used, despite the fact that there was 1 lease signed in 2022 at a face rent of $37 and $31.31 after concessions. Expenses, 2019, $10.16, escalated at 3% a year, gets you to $11.43. Taxpayer uses $10.87. The test uses $9.72. Absorption has been negative. We ask for a 2-year absorption period. If you picture yourself buying a rental property and not being able to get rent on it for 2 years, that is the situation owners find themselves in. And as such, I don't believe you would pay the same amount for a 2-year for a rental that you didn't have the same amount of time to earn income on. Conclusion, rent on occupied space, $38.39. Rent on vacant space, $35.01. Vacancy rate, 30. Expenses, $10.87. Cap rate up 2%. Lease up term, 2 years. Summary, the loan balance surrendered and hearing request denied. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, good morning.
For this case, as compared to the next office case, you can see and make the comparison that the county's guidelines do account for the market rent and adjusting that market rent in lieu of not changing the cap rate. And that's what our sales had suggested, that our cap rates were actually should be decreased. However, in lieu of that, we did make adjustments, as I've stated in previous cases, that we made adjustments based on concessions and adjusting the market rent. And you'll see that difference in this case versus the next case. So in particular, in this case, you'll see that the original 2023 assessment, we overstated the amount of vacancy in the building, whereas it was at 88,577 square feet. Now, comparing that to what we tested in column F, we adjusted downwards to 77,933 square feet, similar to what the pro forma in column G1 is stating, as the appellant agrees with the square foot adjustment. Now, when we're comparing the column E to E1, I just wanted to walk you through that. The operating year 2022 reported, they didn't include, again, the 77,933 square feet of projected income that the county asked for, as for the gross potential of the property. Now, if you see in the gross potential comparison in row 7, when comparing column E and E1, you'll see the difference there, that the county reconstructed the 2022 INE, imputing the agent's numbers of about 2.7 million. So about $2.7 million of imputed income there is not projected for column E versus column E1. So when you do that, the projected income of column E1 versus the test in column F kind of demonstrates exactly what we're showing, is that, with that added income, this is the projected gross potential for this property. This is minus the 25% guidelines. And in addition to that, an increase in expenses that we show in the test. Now, again, I remind you that we decreased the amount of vacant square footage for this property in the test. And as a result, we are showing a confirmation for this property. And upon inspection on July 13th, we viewed this property and we noted that there were some renovations to the lobby, fitness center, conference room, lounges, and this to us indicates an increase in effective age. This building is currently at 1987, original built, no adjustments made to the effective age. Now, I didn't include that in this packet. Well, I did show an example actually of what that would do to the value of the property had we changed that effective age. Now, for purposes of this review, I'm not recommending that effective age change, but by virtue of keeping it as original at 1987, it does still show a confirmation. Now, in particular, our gross potential income versus the reconstructed income, we are $626,900 lower than what is reconstructed in the gross potential income of the property. Our average expenses over the 4 years is about $1,276,77. The county is higher than that and higher than the last 3 years at $9.72 for the expenses. So we're projecting higher than what they've ever shown, except for the year 2019. And then we understand that this property, when we tested the last 3 years, were about 171,639 higher than the last 3 years of the gross potential income. And the appellant is showing that they're lower. If you see the NOI on row 19 and compare that to what they reported in the original 2022 INE column E. So if you compare column E to column G1, the appellant's projecting an even lower net operating income when including 77,933 square feet of vacant space to be leased. So on the surface, to me, that doesn't really make sense, that if they were to lease 77,933 square feet, they would lose money in essence by projecting that income out. Whereas if you compare the county's NOI figure compared to what the reconstruction would be if they included that income, we're projecting still lower, about 600,000 lower than what the projected income should be. And on top of that, reducing it more based on the excess vacancy deductions below the line. So we're at about maybe 4 million, almost 5 million in excess vacancy deductions below the line, on top of being $600,000 lower than what the projected income should be. So with that, I do ask that the board confirm this case, and I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Matzkin.
Thanks. I have a couple of questions. First, I want to make sure I got this right. I'll send this to the department. Looking at the below the line from the test, am I correct that it's that as of date of value, the vacancy was a little over 35,000 square feet, meaning it was about 25% vacant?
As of the date of value, we're at 50% vacant. The residual is the 35,701.
Okay, good, thanks. That very good. I have three questions for the appellant. This is a write-up from the department, so I want to make sure the appellant is on board with this or not. On page 2 of 151, under the appellant, the second bullet, the third line says the most recent lease was a face value of $37. What we were talking about is the $39.50 originally projected by the department that was subsequently reduced to $39 a square foot is still way too high. So you mentioned on the third line, the most recent lease, that's what you're referring to in the second bullet.
So the most recent lease was at a face rate of $37 and a net effective rate of $31.31.
Right, when was that signed?
That was signed in 2022.
Okay, great.
And that's the abstract is on page 62 of our appeal package.
Okay. I'm getting a little spam in the background. I apologize. Now, also for the appellant on page 3 of 151, number 4, operating expenses, you refer down about 2/3 of the way down on the first figures and on the line there, $8.94 per square foot of operating expenses. I don't see that anywhere on page 5, the I&E, the summary sheet. You're referring that, you know, it said.
I'm sorry, Mr. Matzkin, could you point me to me?
Sure.
Could you
Point
tell
number
me
4 on page 3 of operating expenses, about 2/3 of the way down in that paragraph. It says $8.94 a square foot is assumed by the assessment, understates the actual stabilized expenses.
Oh, okay.
Great. I just didn't see the number anywhere. The department used that. If I missed it, obviously I've missed it.
So if you go to the department's test, the original assessment, the original 23 assessment is what Mr. Peralta is referring to. And the original assessment used $1,269,359 in operating expenses. And if you divide that by the square feet, you get to $894.
And not the $9.25 that they have in the margin. $9.25.
Correct.
That's right.
What you're talking about, what you're looking at is the test, I believe.
No, I'm looking at anywhere you want. And the test, it's $9.72 a square foot.
So basically, I think where we came down on expenses, and I'm not sure what the department has or how they come up with their numbers, is we looked at the 2019 the last time the building was physically stabilized was 10/16. And we escalated 3%, and that gets you to 1143. And we actually used 1087. The test used, for my calculations, 972.
Okay, let's let the county speak for what the county did. Mr. Peralta?
Okay, for the original assessment, we're at $9.25. For the office income, vacant office income, and retail income. So if you take 25%, or $9.25 from those figures, actually, I'm sorry. Let's look at,
Yeah, it's supposed to be
the-
net leasable
Right.
area.
hold on one second. Let me just see.
Yeah.
It's on the worksheet. So if I can find the worksheet.
But you changed the square footage.
Okay, hold on, Ms. Borman, hold on. The question is to the county.
Sorry, it's not pulling up as fast as I would want it to, but there is a worksheet in the packet and it shows exactly how we came to our $9.25. One more second. I do apologize. Right, so we used $9.25 for the office NLA of 33,728, retail of 14,923, and vacant office of 88,577. And that's on page 29 of 137 in the packet.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Matzkin?
Well, I mean, I think it's simpler than that. Okay, they're defending it. That's great. Last question. The appellants brought up a couple of times, including this case, that the department is using figures from July of 2023 after the data value, after the assessment period, and therefore it's fair for you to use 2023 figures as well. Could you remind me what number or project or event or activity that happened in July of 2023 that they're using in their calculations?
Mr. Peralta?
I
No,
thought
that's
that was for the appellant.
It's for the appellant.
So what we're looking at is we're saying, hey, the county is looking at, they're inspecting the property, they're bringing up information, they're saying this was the occupancy in July when we were there, it looked great. And so it's colors the cases. And it's what we're saying is, and we're not even including information from 2023. But what we're saying is, hey, the county is doing this. Actually, in this case, we are including some information from 2023 because the property went back to the lender with a debt on it of $31 million. So we're saying, hey, the county's using information from after January 1, so should we be able to? So this property.
Okay, and that information was the vacancy rate, as you already stated, correct?
Well, the vacancy rate it's basically the same as of January 1, 2023 as it is now, about 50%. So that really hasn't changed. What did change is the property has gone back to the lender with debt of $31 million. The owner said this property isn't worth $31 million, so here, lender, you can take it.
Okay, well, that again is 2023, but let's just address the question. Is anything on this grid that we're looking at in column E, E1, or F using information, Ms. Borman, in your opinion, of July? I mean, that's the argument you're using, but I don't think what before us has anything.
I think that in the notes, there is information that is included from 2023. And I believe that in the DREA's reconstruction of the income, they've done that in 2023. And it's like if horses were wishes, beggars would ride. It does not include any relevant information in terms of what actual rents are as of January 1, 2023. It doesn't include the deductions to get that space leased up. It is a complete fabrication of information.
All right.
Can I please address that, please?
Sure, Mr. Peralta.
I take personal offense to that because these cases are highly detailed where I have to, each case, separate each tenant, each square footage, and ensure that there's nothing that crosses over in 2023. I look at it as the first of the year, and I indicated, even on the rent roll where they leased a tenant on March 24th, 2022, and they left it as vacant on the rent roll. And to me, I mean, that's only 3,745 square feet. But that's why we go and do these inspections to clarify all the information. And although it's only 3,745 square feet, that does affect the overall vacancy of the property and the excess vacancy that we use below the line. So for her to say that I impute 2023 information, that's just wrong.
Okay.
I just, that's just wrong. So please taking account
Okay.
that.
Got it. Okay. Other questions? No? All right, Mr. Peralta, any final comments, please?
Yes. So with this 2023 assessment, this represents a negative 10.5% reduction from the 22 assessment. And so, even looking at what we tested in the reconstruction and in our final review of this property in column F, we're still 600,000 below what the projected income should be for this property based on that vacant square footage projected income. So I do ask the board to confirm this case. Even so, if you look at the pictures of this property, the effective age is not original. It should be increased. And with that, even more so supports that this case should be confirmed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Borman, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
The NOI at this property in 2022 was $2,515,000. The test has income that's almost $700,000 more than that. The owners don't provide rent on vacant space because they have no idea what the rent is going to be, and the county is asking for certification. For Mr. Peralta to estimate what the rent would be on vacant space or for the board to rely upon that is just complete speculation. The income of this property has declined from 2019 to 2022 by 46%. It declined by 11% last year. Property is 50% vacant. It was surrendered to the lender at a time when the loan balance was $31 million. The expenses initially used, and I'll just throw this in, appear on the county's worksheet at $8.75 on page 38 of our appeal package. But the real issue here is $31 million sets the upper limit of value for this property. Looking at the actual income, it's declined.
Time is up.
The market cap rate should go up.
All right, thank you both. It's just among the board members. Where are folks? Mr. Matzkin.
There's no question this building isn't doing well, and a double-digit decrease is warranted, whether it's 10 or 20, I'm not sure. I kind of liked two comments. One, the NOI in the test case, in the test column, is lower than the reconstructed appellant's actuals from 2022, which supports what I just said. And second, I could certainly be swayed that the imputed value of the vacant space is less than the decreased from the original assessment values that the department provided, meaning those from column D versus those from column F. But I don't know how much. I have one data point, namely the lease that was signed in March of 2022, at a face value of 37, let alone what its actual value is over the life of the lease. So I would be persuaded to take a lower number and run some numbers or keep it the way it is. So I'd like some feedback on that. And so that's the only qualifying comment I have for not supporting it as the assessment has reconstructed as is.
Okay. Right, I'll jump in a little bit here. You know, I don't agree with the appellant's argument of, you know, the actual income for 2022 being 2.5 million, and then that the county's using 3.1, that's too high. But, you know, we're looking at gross potential, you know, and then we're deducting below the line. So, you know, to kind of just arbitrarily say, oh, it's just way too high. It's not way too high. It's what they're supposed to be doing, looking at the gross potential and then adjust for the vacancy. I don't know. I mean, to me, this really comes down to what the appellant was saying. This is a cap rate issue. I'm fine with the original assessment of the NOI and then the adjustments below the line. You know, I don't know where people are on the cap rate. Mr. Penaralta, turn your microphone on.
Sorry about that. I'm okay with the original assessment, you know, based on the below the line deductions, that considering that the vacant space was much higher, I think it compensates. And, you know, looking at the test, it makes sense just to keep it at the same amount right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mr. Lawson.
When I get up in the morning, I always look at Arl Now. That's the first thing I look at. And the CEO of Amazon has ordered his people to come back into the office 3 days a week, and apparently nobody's listening to him. I think the cap rate is too low. I think it ought to go up a point. And I think the value of this is around 34 million, 222,400. But I doubt anyone's going to agree with me.
All right, Mr. Yates, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was looking exactly what you were, Mary. That I think the adjustment is below the line. I'm fine with it.
Mr. Matzkin?
I'd like to revisit, based on what Barnes said, a comment that I made in this session. The department has explained several times, including today, that instead of changing cap rates, they are lowering, when they do tests, imputed income, and oftentimes increasing operating expenses to adjust for, you know, what would be a stabilized operating expense if the building were significantly occupied. Which brings me back to my first comment, and that is perhaps the way to address this is to therefore lower the foregone rent, the imputed rent increase typically in line, just to make sure that I'm clear. Vacant office line 1A, then maybe it should go down $1 a square foot for both the retail and for the office. By the way, before I forget, I also misspoke in my first comments about the reconstructed amount. I supported that. I got the numbers are almost identical from the original assessment and the test, and I got them backwards. So it's the test I'm supporting. But again, based on the logic, Barnes logic, this is not doing well logic, and the department's approach of lowering imputed rents, maybe that's the way we ought to proceed. If there's support, I know Barnes would support some lowering, and I'm not sure the rest of the colleagues on the board would. But that's what
the only reason why I'm not buying what the county is saying is, to me, it's a Band-Aid when a tourniquet's needed. I think it's a slight adjustment, but it's still way below the reality of the marketplace, in my opinion.
Yeah, one, may I, if I may?
Absolutely.
Of course, we got to pretend this is New Year's Eve, 2022, or
Right.
New Year's Day, and the notion of nobody's going back to work was less clearly understood as it is 9 months, 10 months 9 months later.
Right.
So, I mean, next year there may be some tourniquets being brought out because it does appear that people
Right,
aren't
and
going
this
back
is-
to work.
Oh, I'm sorry. And this is over a 10% reduction,
Sure.
which is certainly warranted.
Right, but the owner couldn't even make it work at the where their mortgage was. The mortgage was, they just couldn't keep the building.
Yeah, but you never know. As you well know, Barn, there's different reasons that people turn in properties. They don't see appreciation, they don't see lease up, or they do. It's their personal assessment of the market and how much money they spend on it already, how much they're going to have to spend on it in terms of capital improvements in the future in order to lease it up. And it's a lot more complicated than just,
I know.
as you
And
very well
also
know,
how
and no
much they
better than
own
I. And we can't.
All right, so so Ken, where are you, I guess?
Well, I mean, I could run the math. I mean, at a minimum, this is the highest assessment that's proposed by the department that I would accept. I would like to lower the vacant office by $1 and then go through the whole thing, but that's arbitrary, and I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about that. And it seems that the rest of the board is comfortable that what the department's done is appropriate, and given them my vote, and therefore I can go either way, and I'm not going to ruin anything.
Okay.
That was mealy mouthed enough for you?
I understood it exactly. Mr. Yates.
I do want to say, I do understand where Irene's coming from on some of this, but I don't feel comfortable in just projecting certain numbers. And I think, Ken, when you said that we're looking at New Year's Eve, I think that's exactly it. I can't see adjusting some of these numbers.
Mhm. All right, well, then with that said, I'm going to go ahead and move to confirm the county at 39,742,500. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Motion and a second by Mr. Penaranda. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it's 4-1 without Mr. Lawson. The county's confirmed at 39,742,500. Thank you. On that, and to our final case, RPC 34020-245 at 2345 Crystal Drive. Ms. Borman, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, please.
Can I share my screen, please?
Absolutely.
For some reason, it's not letting me. I'll just go with it. So this property was built in 1988. Again, a hearing was requested, but denied. DREA does include information in its package from 2019 to July 2023. The weighted average lease term on this building is 2.3 years, and Amazon vacated its short-term space at this building in this year. Now, they had done a lease that was for 28 months. It was known that it was a short-term lease until they moved out into their new property, their new space. The issues on appeal are the capitalization rate, operating expenses, build out, and absorption period. In terms of the capitalization rate, the cap rate that the county is using is disassociated with market reality. The sales that the county took place in the county demonstrate that the guidelines are wrong. The financial markets don't support the guidelines. Interest rates were ignored when setting the guidelines, and even Corpax's report supports a higher cap rate than that used by the county. The county's range of cap rates is below the low end of Mr. Corpax's study that was done in August and below the high end of Mr. Corpax's study. Now, in terms of going back to work, we've heard from Mr. Chicas on a number of occasions. The world has changed. I believe in 2022, we knew people wouldn't go back to work. Even assuming that people went back to work 3 days a week, as has been proposed by Amazon this year, not last year, on December 31st, they were still remote. 3 days a week is 3/5 And, it's going to engender items such as office hoteling and smaller offices. So I believe that even at 3/5 of the time, we all knew in 2022 that the great return to work was not going to happen. And I knew that on New Year's Eve. I knew that on June 31st or June 30th. So in terms of the cap rate study, that the county is below the low end of the range. Once again, it had occupancy, those buildings had occupancy of 95%. The guidelines state that the county was only 77% occupied. The weighted average lease term on those buildings, these are the best of the best, was 7 years. The subject had only 2.3 years of weighted average lease term left. The range for stabilized assets with 95% occupancy and 7 years of lease term was between 5.5 and 7.76. The county, again, is below the low end of that range at 5.4 and below the high end of that range at 7.1. Again, the best of the best. We need to increase cap rates on the sales that took place by 197 basis points to get to the delta between the cap rate and the guidelines. The T-bill rate and the county guidelines, you need to add 194 basis points. SOFR went up 425, triple B corporate bonds went up 310, 30-year fixed mortgage up 331, the 10-year T-bill up 236. The county simply has ignored the fact that commercial property is an investment and runs on the amount of capital, a return on capital. Absorption, let's talk about that. We have negative absorption over the last 3 years, minus 2.6 million. The total average net absorption from 2008 to 2022 was only 175,000 square feet. In the county alone, there is 8,600,000 square feet available as of January 1, and that does not account for the additional 2.5 million square feet under construction. Now, in the last case, we actually had 5 leases. We had 4 from 2021 at a weighted average rate of 35.01 and 1, which is the rate the taxpayer used, and 1 at 31. We used 35.01. I would tell you in this instance, the rate used by the county is more in line with what we believe the rental rate should be. We are not arguing that this year, but we are arguing that the WALT is 2.3 years, that Amazon vacated 102,000 square feet, that Amazon still has a capacity in its building for 8,000 more workers, that the cost to build out vacant space is $115, not $90, and that the rent loss should be a negative 2-year adjustment, not a negative 1-year adjustment. This would be akin to saying, I'm going to buy a rental property, but I'm not going to get income on it for 2 years. You would not pay the same amount for that property if you were not going to get income for 2 years. You would pay more for it if you were going to get income after 1 year. In this case, as is the case throughout the county, a 1-year absorption period is just too low. So in conclusion, the cap rate should go up by 2% or 200 basis points. Operating expenses should go to 907. Build out should go to 115. And the lease up period should go to 2 years. Now, I don't believe, once again, and I don't believe any of us can honestly say that we thought there would be a return to work in 2022. It has become clearer in 2023 that you can't even if a boss tells you you're going to come back to work, it's not happening. But we all knew in 2022 that the great return to work was not going to occur. It has impacted the capital market. It has impacted the risk associated with commercial markets and investment in office products, and the assessment simply can't be sustained. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Thank you. For this property, what the appellant doesn't state or doesn't really point out is the $3 million in difference between the NOI that was reported in 2022 versus what the department's test is in column F. I mean, that's a $3 million difference there. So if you look at the previous years where they reported just that, less than 3 million in 2021 compared to the 2022 INE, and then in column B and column A in 2019, 2020. So the Amazon tenancy hasn't shown in the INEs in previous years. The 1 year that it does, and which the county hasn't captured fully, is when she wants to reduce it down the line and say, hey, they're not in the building. You shouldn't really take in consideration that income. So what we did in the county's test was we did both. We didn't take that consideration. If you compare a column E to column F, just in the NOI alone, that's a difference of a delta of 3 million. And in addition to that, below the line, we accounted for the 102,512 square feet that Amazon has vacated. So in addition to being 3 million below less than in NOI, we take an additional that's like 4 million in rent loss, 8.9 in TIs, 1.3 in leasing commissions, and another 1.688 in land density, and in which I've asked, actually, it's a good time to bring that up, because with the land density, I had the record staff look up the information. Now, I didn't include it in the packet, and I kept it in there, but they found nothing to show that land density should be deducted from this property. If anything, they did say that they acquired some density, I thought, but I don't want to misspeak, and I don't have that reference to point to, but that land density is in question, and it will be reviewed for next year. But in all essence, for this property, we underestimated the vacant square footage in the original assessment. And by virtue of our guidelines and vacancy deductions, we're knocking this property down another 8%. I'm sorry, another 5%, which the test represents is a 5% decrease from the original assessment. And looking at the permits of the property, it took a lot for this property to house Amazon, if you will. And looking at the permits, page 14 to 19, that just gives you a reference of all the permits that were pulled for this property. About $14 million of improvements were done to the property. Now, I can't speak to exactly, what particular items were done, but if you ingest $14 million into a property and then you don't expect this property to increase in effective age or the life of the property to increase, then that's an issue that the department is dealing with, where I did know the effective age of the subject property should increase based on these improvements done to their property. So without including that effective age change, without including that 102,512 square feet of Amazon space vacating, we're projecting this property lower than what we did in the original assessment. And as I stated in the first case, this is the opposite, where they're actually projecting a gross potential income of if you look on row 7, gross potential income of the property. When we're comparing from previous years, again, that is showing that the Amazon tenancy or the leases in place, which the leases for this property have up to 6 to 7 years left on the lease. And that represents about 93,000 square feet of space with leases in place that are left for the next 6 to 7 years of increase. So we expect fully for that gross potential income to grow by virtue of the contract leases to 2.5%, 3%. So when we're projecting this income, we did project almost to the T of exactly what the appellant has projected. We had a minor difference in, I believe, some of the miscellaneous income, about 62,784 square feet, but that's exactly what was shown. And in every case, we kind of look at what was actually made for the property and use that in our test. So with respect to the appellant's version of the income versus the departments, we are allowing everything that they've asked for. It's just a minor difference in 2-year absorption is what they've talked about. They expect $115 in TIs, but they don't want the effective age to change at all, even though they've adjusted for that in the TIs. But overall, as I stated in the permits, that's just I didn't note the low-lying fruit. I just saw that the permits over the years, about 14 million, represented $4 million at one time, 2.7, 4.1, 1.6, and 1.4. And my math brought that up to 14 million in permits alone in the property. So to suggest that property didn't increase in effective age over the years is the department's issue. But when looking at the projected income, that should be taken into account. And any appraiser that's appraising this property would take that into account. And so we do ask that the board confirm the reduction of this property based on the information I provided. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Metzger.
Nature hates a vacuum. I have an easy question for the appellant. You had made comments that the most recent leases were signed at face and effective rents lower than projected. Correct me if I'm wrong, lower than what is assumed by the county. Did I hear you right?
We're fine with the rents that are used by the county.
You're all fine. Good, because that would lead to my second part. And that's it. Thanks very much for clarification.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, Mr. Peralta, any final comments?
No, I did see that, forgive me, but I've seen a lot of cases, but the Amazon lease was supposed to be until 2024. I understand that the appellant suggests that they vacated, and I confirmed that during the inspection. I do not know, however, it's unclear if they're still paying on the space or not. But again, the elephant in the room is the projected NOI that they reported in 2022 versus the test column, which we are $3 million less, and that's the delta. I do ask the county to, the board to confirm the reduction in the county's test. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Barman, if you take a minute to wrap up.
The office market has undergone a structural change. Demand is not there. Amazon entered into a lease for a short term, bumped the income in for a short term, and has vacated the space as confirmed by Mr. Peralta. The build out is going to cost $115 per square foot. There is a $90 per square foot build out is just does not take into account the increases in the costs of construction. The capitalization rate is not supported. The rate here is below rates that Mr. Corpax came up with for highly stabilized properties. There has been negative absorption. No potential purchaser would assume that they would lease up in 1 year. And we believe that a 2-year absorption period is appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, it's just among the board members. Where's everybody on this? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I want to read an article from July 11, 2022. This is out of Arlington Now. The pandemic and work from home trends are causing pain for owners of office buildings in Arlington and across the region. Arlington's office vacancy rate reached 20.8% this month, according to data from CoStar as relayed by Arlington Economic Development. That's up from 16.6% at the beginning of 2020 as the pandemic first took hold, and 18.7% at the beginning of 2021. As of the first quarter of this year, it went to 23%. So That's going from 18.7 to 23%. You have leases that are being renewed or new leases for significantly less space. You have interest rates that have increased. You have inflation, and the county's cap rate remains unchanged. It's not reality.
Okay, other folks? Mr. Metzgen.
In this case, I thought the department has accommodated the continuingly weakened office property success in Arlington and probably nationwide generally by including the Amazon move out, which is a big slug. You know, it's 1/5, almost 1/5 of the entire building. Not even, you know, generally we'd see, well, that's, you know, they're moving out now, next year, see what happens. And we don't do below the line because it's the overall existing actual vacancy is less than 25%. But they did it anyway. And now we find out they don't even know whether Amazon's paying or not. So, I mean, there's no people there flushing toilets and using other expenses, landlords' operating expenses, but they may be paying and we don't know. But to me, that was the key, that they did below the line for a big slug of move out that didn't occur last year. There was just a promise of move out, which happened. So, I mean, to me, that offsets a lot of the weakness in this and other buildings, sir.
Okay, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, Ken, I hear what you're saying and I respect it. I think the problem is, and the reason I read that article is, in order to lease up this empty space, you've got to take a haircut or it's going to take years. And to say, well, okay, we're going to use a year, we're going to use $90. I mean, it's just not reality. I mean, it could take a decade to lease these buildings up. So that's why I think the cap rate needs adjustment. And the county, again, you know, this is my opinion, but I think the county is taking little steps when a big step is needed. Now, that's just my opinion.
Mr. Metzger.
Okay, that's sensible. I mean, from the professional's point of view, what I see is, however, that the county hasn't abandoned its normal, and we've heard this a number of times, I'm not putting words in their mouths, and I don't believe, and that they look at sales during the assessment period, and it lags. And by definition, these sales didn't occur on New Year's Eve. And that's what they come up with. And that's what they've always done when the market's robust, when it's declining. And I'm as sympathetic as I am to office property owners, that is an element of how they and their colleagues around the state or country do it. I mean, that's how you get a cap rate. What are the sales? And going to be, and if we're in the same no cap rate change next year, I'd sure love to see the sales for 2023. I'd be surprising that they stayed stable, and we'll find that out a year from now. But for this year, they're consistent, and that's really key to our whole process, consistency.
All right, Mr. Penaranda.
I agree. I mean, I think the county has, and this is not a first time argument that we hear this, that, you know, the market is just going bad and it's going to last forever. I mean, I've been on the board for over 15 years and we've heard this before, and, you know, it doesn't really happen that way a lot of the time. So it's hard to really predict, you know, more than 2 or 3 years, I think, in my opinion. That's why I think, you know, when we look at each assessment, I think we've done it, I think, in my opinion, in a correct way to look at year after year. So, you know, I'm okay with the assessment the way they revised. Although I increased the expenses a little bit, and it does change some on the final number. I increased it to $9 instead of $8.75. But I'm not sure if anybody else would be inclined to do anything like that.
And
Why
and
did
you
you do
left everything else the same?
Yes.
Okay, and what was your final number after the below the line?
At $9, the final value and below the line deductions, including the land density, would be 176,320,200.
Did you get that number from the actuals the landlord reported?
That's, I'm looking at the revised assessment and making the change on the expenses at $9. And that's still a reduction of almost 6% from last year, you know.
No, my question was, where'd you get $9 or not 9.25 or, any other number?
From the actual expenses and the pro forma.
Reported by the property owner. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that was my question. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Yates?
We're looking at this every year and what that occupancy is and what's getting leased up. I don't believe, yes, I hear everything and we can, making projections of how long 10 years this could take or 2 years. We don't know. We're looking at it at the time of for the assessment period, and it's adjusted every year. I'm fine. And I could go with Jose's. I mean, it's a minor adjustment, but.
Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, this will be my final comment, I promise, guys. You know what, Jose, you made a great point, and until this year, I refuse to consider cap rate changes because I've seen how many times we've had owners argue my property sucks, it's terrible, it's not worth anything. And then 2 weeks later, I read that it just sold for more than the assessed value. I think, though, that with office, I think that we have a total different approach to how it's going to work from now on. And I don't know when it'll get right again. Maybe it'll never get right again. But I see a fundamental change in the way the world is operating. That's why I'm willing to change cap rates. And with that, I'll shut up, Madam Chairman.
All right, Mr. Yates?
Thank you.
But Barnes, if they're not selling, if going forward, if they're not selling for those prices, and like you said, quite often we see something a little higher. But if that's not happening, that's what's we're gonna see going forward, and that's what's gonna change those cap rates, is the actual results that we're seeing. If a $100 million building sells for 95 versus 110. I mean, we'll see that, and that's what's going to change it.
Or 75.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, it takes time for them to fall out. You have owners that are desperately hoping rates will go down or whatever will happen. We're starting to see property going back to lenders. It's happening right now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And people are looking at their long-term pictures of what their investment strategies are. It'll end up reflecting that as we move forward.
All right, I believe, Mr. Penaranda, you have enough votes to do what you want to do.
Sure. I'll go ahead and move the reduce the assessment to 176,320,200, and that's by increasing the expenses of $9 on the revised assessment.
Okay, I got a motion. Do I have a second? Okay, Mr. Maskin is a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it is 4-1 without Mr. Lawson. The assessment is reduced to 176,320,200 based on increasing the expenses to $9 a square foot off of the revised. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other business? No? Okay, then we will stand adjourned here at 10:55, reconvene tomorrow morning in person for the board at 9 o'clock on the 30th. And Rosa will bring the time cards tomorrow for everybody to sign. So we will sign off and
Right.
see everybody tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, board members.